Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. I was stacking the laundry, the hum of the washer filling the small room, when a sudden warmth brushed against my hip. I froze, a shiver crawling up my spine, my heartbeat spiking as I slowly turned my head. He was standing there, impossibly close, leaning casually against the doorway, his eyes holding mine longer than necessary. My chest tightened as I realized he hadn't moved away. Not even an inch. The air seemed to thicken between us, heavy with the tension neither of us dared to break. I could feel the faint brush of his hand as if it had happened by accident, yet his gaze, dark and knowing, betrayed him. There was something deliberate in the way he lingered, something that made the heat pooling in my stomach impossible to ignore. My pulse pounded in my ears as I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the closeness, the charged silence, said otherwise. I adjusted the thin t-shirt that clung to me, aware that even the smallest movement would be noticed. The hum of the dryer, the creak of the floorboards, every mundane sound suddenly felt amplified, marking every heartbeat, every shallow breath. A playful curve of his lips tugged at the corner of his mouth, almost a smile, and I could barely breathe around the flutter of nervous anticipation that made my hands tremble slightly. I wanted to step back, to break the tension, but my body didn't obey. There was a magnetic pull, something unspoken between us, as if the moment itself was alive, holding us suspended in this delicate dance. The silence stretched, charged and teasing, until it felt like we were the only two people in the world. I swallowed, unsure if I wanted the spell to break, unsure if I could even move if it did. And then, just as I thought I might make a safe retreat, his hand brushed mine, or maybe it was just closer than necessary, and my world tilted, suspended in anticipation. What would happen next? Neither of us dared speak, yet every glance, every subtle movement promised that the next second could change everything. Ever since I'd first met him, there had always been this strange push and pull between us, an unspoken tension that made ordinary moments feel electric. On the surface, we were friendly, casual, easygoing even, but underneath that, there were these tiny fissures in our connection, subtle cracks that hinted at something deeper, something neither of us dared to name aloud. He had always been attentive, but sometimes too close for comfort, lingering just a second longer than necessary when he passed by, brushing against my arm or shoulder as if by accident. And I, for my part, found myself noticing every detail, the way his eyes darkened when he looked at me, the way his lips twitched when he caught me staring. I told myself it was harmless, that it was just curiosity, but my heart betrayed me with each encounter, hammering in my chest like a secret drumbeat that refused to be ignored. We had shared quiet evenings, talking about everything and nothing. I had let him in just enough to see the small insecurities he carried, his hesitation to open up fully, the fleeting shadows behind his smiles. And yet, even when we laughed together, there was a tension that lingered, a magnetic pull that made even casual touches feel like sparks. Every shared joke, every accidental brush of skin, felt like it carried a weight, like the air itself had thickened around us. There were moments when I caught myself imagining what it would be like if the boundaries didn't exist, if he crossed the line we had never acknowledged but both felt. It scared me, and yet, it excited me in a way I couldn't admit even to myself. I noticed the subtle gestures he made when he thought I wasn't looking, a brush of hair behind my ear, a hand lingering near mine just a fraction too long, a gaze that seemed to measure me in ways words never could. But we were careful, both of us, tiptoeing around the obvious, pretending it was nothing more than friendly closeness. Every interaction felt like a careful game, with each smile, each laugh, each fleeting moment of physical proximity both teasing and testing the limits. And in that balance, between restraint and desire, our connection grew in intensity, an invisible thread pulling tighter with each passing day. I wanted to ask, to challenge him, to finally acknowledge what was there, but I was afraid. Afraid of breaking the fragile rhythm we had, afraid of shattering the careful dance we performed daily. And yet, when he appeared behind me that day in the laundry room, brushing against my hip just like he had before, I realized that the tension had reached a point where restraint was no longer enough. The past, the shared laughter, the stolen glances, they had all led us here, to a moment suspended between curiosity and anticipation. The next few days felt like walking on a tightrope. Every glance he threw my way made my stomach twist, every laugh that wasn't mine felt like a minor betrayal. I found myself noticing how he lingered near the kitchen when I was cooking, how his hand brushed over the counter just a fraction too close to mine. It was maddening and intoxicating at the same time. Then there was the way he sometimes smiled at someone else, just a friend, he said, but it sparked a jealousy I hadn't expected. I hated that it bothered me, yet it did. My pulse would spike, and suddenly I wanted to pull him back into my orbit, to reclaim the closeness I craved. Every time he laughed with someone else, I caught myself imagining what it would feel like if he were only mine, if the air between us was finally allowed to crack open. At night, I would lie awake replaying little moments, the accidental brush of his shoulder, the way his hand hovered near mine before retreating, the teasing tilt of his head when he caught me staring. There was an electric tension in those silent exchanges, a dangerous sort of intimacy that made it impossible to act normal around him. Every small gesture felt like a test, every glance a provocation, and I couldn't tell if I was hoping he would cross the line, or dreading it. It was in the laundry room again, the same thin t-shirt clinging to me, when the tension finally broke the surface. He appeared behind me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. My chest tightened, a delicious nervousness sweeping through me, and I realized that the boundary we had carefully maintained for months was thinner than I'd ever admitted. I wanted to step back, but I couldn't. I wanted him to move away, but the thought of losing even a moment of that closeness was unbearable. There was a charged silence, a moment where the world seemed to shrink down to just us. His eyes met mine with a daring look, a silent question hanging in the air. The mix of longing, jealousy, and temptation had pulled us to this fragile edge, a place where everything was possible but nothing was confirmed. I could feel it, the delicious tension of the forbidden, the thrill of something unspoken finally being tangible. And then, we waited, suspended in that precarious instant, both daring the other to make the first move, knowing that the moment we did, nothing could be the same. The house was quiet that evening, the soft hum of the air conditioner blending with the distant tick of the wall clock. I found myself in the kitchen, pretending to organize the pantry, while he lingered near the doorway, pretending to check his phone. The truth was obvious to both of us, we were alone, and the space between us felt impossibly small. Every accidental brush, every small movement seemed amplified, like the universe itself was holding its breath. I could feel the warmth radiating from him as he leaned casually against the counter. My pulse raced, my hands trembled slightly as I reached for a can of beans, the tin brushing against his hand in a way that felt deliberate. Neither of us moved to break the contact. The playful tension, the unspoken longing, hung thick in the air, making it impossible to think straight. He gave me a sideways glance, the corner of his mouth tugging upward, a daring, teasing smile that made my stomach flutter. There was a closeness now that felt undeniable, a magnetic pull neither of us could resist. My breath hitched, my heart beating faster as our proximity seemed to shrink the room around us. I wanted to step back, to regain control, but every fiber of me wanted to stay, to feel the charged warmth of him near. I caught a flicker of jealousy in my mind, the thought of him being with anyone else suddenly unbearable. The tension had escalated to a point where even silence spoke volumes, where a single glance could ignite a fire neither of us could contain. Every small movement, his hand resting briefly near mine, the tilt of his head, the way his eyes held mine, was a silent conversation, a test of boundaries and desire. We were standing there, just inches apart, and it was clear, something was about to happen. The air between us was electric, every second stretching longer than the last. I could feel it in the tightness of my chest, in the nervous flutter in my stomach. And then, just as I thought I might speak, he reached slightly closer, and the tension reached a breaking point. Our eyes locked, a silent question passing between us. The moment hung there fragile, impossible, and unbearably charged, leaving me frozen, heart-hammering, wondering who would make the first move. The kitchen was still, the soft glow of the evening sun spilling across the countertops, when the moment finally broke. I had been standing near the pantry, heart racing, every nerve on edge, acutely aware of how close he was. The charged silence stretched between us, like a taut wire ready to snap. And then, without a word, he stepped closer, just enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. My pulse spiked, every instinct screaming that this closeness was dangerous, but thrilling. Before I could say anything, his eyes softened, the teasing glint replaced by something heavier, something raw and vulnerable. "I need to tell you something," he said, voice low, hesitant, yet impossible to ignore. My chest tightened. This was it, the truth, finally breaking through the tension we had been dancing around for months. I felt my breath hitch as he revealed it, a confession, long held and carefully hidden, about feelings he had never admitted aloud. He spoke of how every laugh, every glance, every brush of skin had pulled him closer to me than he thought he should allow. The words struck me like a jolt of electricity, igniting a cocktail of emotions, shock, relief, fear, and an undeniable thrill. I wanted to protest, to say that this wasn't right, but the sincerity in his eyes left me speechless. It was the first time I realized he had been struggling with the same forbidden pull I had felt, the same craving for closeness that had made ordinary interactions feel so intense. And yet, as he spoke, a sudden twist unfolded. He admitted that he had almost walked away, afraid of crossing a line neither of us had acknowledged, unsure if I even felt the same way. The confession hung in the air between us, charged and electric. I could see the raw vulnerability etched in his expression, and I realized, with a rush of emotion, that all the teasing, the tension, the jealousy, had been leading to this moment. It wasn't about a single touch or glance, it was about what we had been denying ourselves for months, the unspoken truth that had built quietly, insistently, until it could no longer be ignored. And just as I opened my mouth to answer, to voice the hidden desires I'd kept locked away, the sound of a door creaking upstairs froze us both. Someone else was home, and the moment of confession, the culmination of everything we had felt and denied, hung there, suspended, impossible to resolve. We glanced at each other, eyes wide, hearts hammering, caught between the undeniable pull of our emotions and the sudden intrusion that reminded us that the world outside this charged bubble still existed. The tension was electric, unresolved, leaving us on the edge of something monumental, yet impossible to finish. The minutes after the confession stretched impossibly long, each second dripping with tension. The sound of the front door closing upstairs reminded us that the moment we had shared in suspended secrecy could no longer remain ours alone. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, a mix of adrenaline, relief, and the lingering fear of being caught in the raw vulnerability we had just exposed. He stepped back slightly, running a hand through his hair, the hint of nervousness breaking through his otherwise composed demeanor. "I shouldn't have said anything," he muttered, voice tight. "It's complicated." My chest ached at the sight of him wavering, and I realized that what had built between us wasn't just attraction, it was an emotional investment that demanded courage, honesty, and risk. "I need to know if you feel the same," I said, voice steady despite the flutter in my stomach. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and I saw the conflict play across his features, desire versus restraint, longing versus fear. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock. Finally, he exhaled sharply, stepping closer, eyes locked on mine. "I do," he admitted, voice low but unwavering. "I've been trying to fight it, but I can't anymore." The relief that surged through me was overwhelming, a mix of validation and the intoxicating thrill of mutual confession. The emotional weight of months of unspoken tension seemed to lift, replaced by a raw, undeniable connection that neither of us could ignore. We shared a quiet laugh, a release of all the nervous energy that had coiled tightly around us for weeks. And yet, the reality of our situation reminded us to stay careful, to navigate this new closeness without overstepping boundaries we weren't ready to cross. The charged energy lingered, a spark that promised more, but we took a step back to acknowledge the gravity of our choices. "I don't know what happens next," he whispered, gaze searching mine, "but I want to figure it out, with you." I nodded, my hand brushing against his briefly, a fleeting contact, yet full of meaning. In that small, almost accidental touch, there was forgiveness, trust, and the promise of a new beginning. We had faced the emotional storm, confronted our desires, and survived. The tension had broken, but the path ahead shimmered with possibilities yet to unfold. The kitchen, once a backdrop of tension and secrecy, now felt alive with promise. We stood there, hearts still racing, smiles tentative but genuine, each of us savoring the quiet victory of honesty and the unspoken promise that the story wasn't over, it was only just beginning. The kitchen was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun filtering through the curtains. After the emotional storm, after the confessions and the suspense, there was a rare, almost sacred stillness between us. I could feel it in the air, the gentle shift from tension to ease, from longing to understanding. Every glance, every slight movement, carried a new weight, a quiet promise of connection finally acknowledged. He stepped closer, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his lips, and I felt my heart flutter in response. There was no need for grand gestures, no rush, just a steady, tender approach that spoke louder than words ever could. Our eyes met, and in that gaze, all the months of unspoken tension, every stolen glance, every accidental brush of skin, seemed to find its resolution. Without thinking, I reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation. The simple touch was electric, a subtle acknowledgement of everything we had shared and everything we hoped to build together. There was laughter too, quiet and easy, a release of the nervous energy that had clung to us for weeks. In that moment, the past, the teasing, the jealousy, the suspense faded into memory, replaced by the warmth of connection, mutual trust, and shared vulnerability. We moved together in perfect, natural rhythm, sitting at the small kitchen table, hands still entwined, talking in hushed voices. There was no rush, no pressure, just the comfort of presence, the thrill of emotional closeness that neither of us had dared to claim before. Every glance carried warmth, every smile carried reassurance, and every silence was a space of intimacy rather than suspense. For the first time, I realized that this quiet, gentle bond, built on honesty, mutual attraction, and vulnerability, was more thrilling and satisfying than anything the tension and uncertainty had ever offered. We laughed, we teased, we shared small stories, and through it all, the closeness between us deepened. The emotional storm had passed, leaving a calm, enduring connection that promised both passion and comfort in equal measure. As the sunlight shifted across the room, painting soft shadows on the walls, I leaned slightly closer, resting my head near his shoulder. He responded instinctively, tilting his head just enough to touch mine gently. The warmth spread through me, a quiet, blissful contentment that words could never fully capture. We didn't need more than this, the shared heartbeat of closeness, the lingering touch, the knowledge that we had crossed the emotional bridge together. And in that moment, the story felt complete. The tension, the secrets, the longing, all resolved in a single, tender bond. The room seemed to hold its breath with us, a perfect ending to a journey that had been anything but ordinary.